this transaction is a huge deal.
It's the biggest transaction of your life, right? And this is not a DIY project.
You can't screw this up. You need to get it right.
Welcome to P&L, Priorities and Lifestyle, with your host, Rob Schultz. Rob is the founder and president of Schultz Wealth. All opinions expressed by Rob and his guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Schultz Wealth Limited. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Please refer to our website for more information.
Welcome everybody to P&L, Priorities and Lifestyle. I'm your host, Rob Schultz. And today we have Michel. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you've been doing a lot of really fun stuff the last couple of years because you actually have gone where a lot of us, want to be. You have transitioned out of your business, which was Service Nation. You founded it, you led it, you sold it in 2017, I believe. Hung around for a while, maybe a little longer than you expected due to COVID. Is that right? Or
I managed to hang on for over 5 years, which is really unusual for a founder to stay on after a business sale.
Yeah, very unusual. Yeah. All right. So, folks, if you are a contractor, HVAC, heating and air, like plumber, home service type person, you already know who Matt is. Okay, because you are familiar with Service Nation. Service Nation, in many ways, has developed that entire industry into what it is today, which is a very, very sophisticated business that has a lot of value to it. And Matt has been really one of the primary instigators in making that happen with Service Nation and with his leadership throughout the entire industry. Y'all know that. Now, those of you who may not be in that industry may not know that, but I have to tell you, this is a big deal having Matt on today. He has some incredible insight for us for two reasons. One is because he's been an incredible leader within the industry. He has this huge bio. There's no way I can read it as long. It's got massive meat to it. But you're considered the contractor's North Star by Contracting Business Magazine. You're in the Aggie 100 6 times, Dallas 100, Fort Worth 50, Inc. 5000. This just goes on and on. This is Matt is one of those guys that has probably shaped and helped so many people succeed. And what we're going to talk about today, hopefully, is your personal transition and how that's touched you and kind of sent you in a different direction as far as, I guess, your consulting. Is that right?
I'm not really consulting,
okay.
but what I am doing is writing and speaking.
Yeah, so there's a new book and there's a new concept around transition. And would it be fair to say that you helped and led and watched people do this over and over again, but there are some things that you just have to learn by going through it?
Well, hopefully we can always learn from the experience of others.
Yeah.
And so that's what we try to do with this book. And the book is on the emotional side of selling a business. And it was really instigated by Brandon Jacob. He's an M&A advisor.
Okay.
And he focuses on the service trades. Brandon and I are good friends. And Brandon says he goes through the same issues, the same process over and over and over again. He thought, if I just had a book that I could hand to him.
Yeah.
And in the course of talking this over, I'm sort of unemployed now and was kind of looking for something to do. And so we decided that we're going to get together and write this book. And then we decided to structure it. In my past, I also have some experience as a marketing consultant, doing marketing research, doing, some big projects, big studies. We took sort of an analytic approach to it. And so that we're doing this a little bit more empirically. And we started out with depth interviews. And we've interviewed nearly 100 different business owners who have sold their companies. We've also talked to some M&A advisors, some investment bankers, some business buyers. And what we probed is what people go through. And as we've gone through this process, we've learned that there's really four parts to the whole process of selling your business. And the first part is what prompted you to sell it. Brandon likes to say, what's the catalyst? And there's different things that go, and that's sort of section 1. Section 2 is then getting to the LOI, right? And the LOI is the best day in the sale of a business. Now, it sounds ridiculous.
Why is that?
Because it's all possibilities. It's all real. You can see the money coming in. You're thinking in your mind of the things that you're going to do with it, and you have none of the pain yet, because the pain starts the day after the LOI is signed, and that's going through due diligence and getting to close. And so then that's the third part, and then the last part is what happens after close. And a lot of people will stay on. They'll stay on in their businesses for a while. Typically, they last less than 2 years. And at some point, they will walk away. And then what happens after that is really interesting. And that's where the emotional side comes in. It really comes in all through the process.
I would say so. But yeah. No, so in talking to you, it sounds like you really try to capture and understand and help communicate this emotional aspect to the transition, which is huge, because, if you sit there, of course, most M&A talks that you sit through or books, et cetera, and so forth, the numbers are important, but it seems like that's a lot of times just about as far as it goes, and nobody really gets into the emotional part, which I think it's crucial.
Yeah, so a lot of them focus on the process, or they focus on these are techniques that you can use.
Mm-hmm.
This is the steps that you'll follow. Here's what you can do to get a little bit more for your company, but nobody prepares you for the day after you walk away.
Yeah,
and we talk to people from all kinds of industries. I mean, we talk to farmers, we talk to dentists, we talk to pharmacists, we talk to contractors, we talk to software engineers, that built software companies. It's just across the board. I remember one woman that we talked to who sold a second generation business
mm-hmm.
that was associated with her mother, and it was associated with her entire life. So she had to hire a consultant to help her figure out how to introduce herself to people, because she'd always been part of this company. And when she sold it, she didn't know who she was.
That's really common. I mean, especially the true one company entrepreneurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the serial ones, but the ones that really did build a business from the ground, or it was a second generation, whatever it may be. This is their one transaction. And this business has become such a big part of, it's who they are, and that's tough. You got to be able to recognize that and understand that there are some things that you're gonna have to replace. You're gonna have to replace some relationships. You're gonna have to replace some time, obviously. Find out, really, what you feel like your true worth is, in a lot of ways as well, I would suspect.
You have to have purpose.
Yeah.
That's the big missing element is people that step away, they lose their purpose. So now what's the new purpose? And they've got to come up with one. Mm-hmm. And it's a struggle for people. And there's a lot of business owners that after they sell, they go through a period of depression.
Yes.
And I know a guy who sold a $500,000 business, and he went through a period of depression afterwards. I think I went through one. It wasn't severe, but it was a struggle. Who am I? What am I doing? And I maintain relationships with the trade press. So I still write for 5 different trade magazines. And yet I'm still sort of had to go through this struggle period.
Yeah, and some people, statistically, they talk about all the time the buyer's or the seller's remorse, I
mm-hmm.
guess, and they say, I think 80% or something like that of business owners feel some type of remorse. And then I think in some ways mistakenly, we say, oh, well, the remorse is because you didn't do the deal right. Well, maybe. But I think a lot of it just has to do that you just weren't prepared for what's on the other side of that sucker.
Well, so here's the thing. We talked about that, and we got into that and they all feel remorse, but they're all really happy they did it, right? So none of them would go back and not do it because they were well compensated for their company.
Sure.
Right? And And in some cases it's life-changing money, in other cases it wasn't, but still they all went through that. And one of the most common emotions that people feel in closing is relief. So when you run a business, you're putting all of your eggs in one basket, and you're putting a whole lot of risk out there. And that's one of the things that differentiates the entrepreneur from the employee, is the entrepreneur can live with that element of risk, and he's comfortable with it and he takes it. But still, it's always there. It's always hanging over him. There's always what could go wrong, what could cause all this to crash, what could end this for me before I get my opportunity to cash out. So when they do cash out, debts are paid. One guy told us he was so happy because he had I think it was a $20 million note that he was on the hook for it, for his company. That was wiped away when he sold the company, because he was able to pay it off, walk away from that clean and still have money left over.
Yeah, I would say you're right. I think that over time, just that risk, and in some cases the debt that you accrue trying to build this business, it just builds up on your shoulders. You almost don't even realize it's there until it's not there anymore.
Exactly.
And then it drops off and you're like, wow, who am I? Because some of it's a little bit addictive in a way too. I would say that, business owners, they're
stress junkies.
Yeah, adrenaline, that feel. And sometimes I think that, really good business owners, man, they get that feeling in their chest, that adrenaline rush that's either from stress or excitement or whatever it needs to be. And, it's there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you get to where you're used to it, and then you transition out and maybe it's not there anymore, I bet you some of them kind of are looking for some of that again. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that there is an element of that. I can tell from a personal side. I remember when we closed on our sale, it's the most anticlimactic thing ever to close on the sale of a business, right? It happens over a phone call now. There used to be dinners, but ours, I didn't even realize we sold the company. I was on the phone for a conference call. And I'm just, this is during due diligence, and I'm just, they're going to ask for more stuff. The CFO gets on, he asks for one more piece of information, and I'm sitting there, and instead of saying, this is ridiculous, which I wanted to say, I said, I can get it for you, but I can't get it today. It'll take me a week or so. And I heard this, no, that's okay. What? Yeah. What?
And that's
never happened before.
So you had closed and you didn't know it? What?
Well, it was coming. So then I hear their attorney talking to our attorney and asking if everything, if the checklist is good to him. And I'm immediately, when I hear our attorney, I'm like, who invited him on this phone call? And I know what his hourly rate is, and I'm calculating this in my head.
Yeah.
And he starts saying, it looks good to me. And their guy says, well, let's start the countdown. And then I hear all these people going, congratulations, congratulations, congratulations. And I'm like, who all is on this call? And I hear this ding, 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 and these people ringing off. We do it on Zoom now, but this was kind of pre-Zoom. And I'm sitting there on the phone. I said, is anybody still there? Their attorney says, yeah, I am. I said, what just happened? I said, you just sold your company. And I was like, oh, you're kidding me.
So they said that the countdown started.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, like a rocket launch something?
That's exactly what I said. What, we just launched a rocket? And people started laughing, and I did not, and the money came in that afternoon. It came in.
Oh, yeah.
And I took it was, for me, I had 30 investors. So it was a great deal of pleasure to start wiring money out.
Yeah.
And that felt really good. But, one of the things that really didn't hit me on the stress side was a few days later. So before we sold, we swept all the money, we swept all of our cash out, and we had a lot of cash build up.
Okay.
And millions, and we swept it out. I tried to get them to pay us, dollar for dollar for the cash, because then it would have been, long-term capital gains instead of short-term capital gains.
Understood. So you were trying to leave it in.
I was trying to leave it in.
And just let them make it part of the transaction. Yeah. They wouldn't do that.
Yeah. They wouldn't do that. So anyway, it was swept out. So for the first time in years, we've got a payroll coming up, and I'm starting to think, wait a minute, do we have enough cash? And I'm going through this in my head, mentally driving to the office, thinking about where money is and what I can pull and how much I need. And all of a sudden, it was like this flash. It's not my problem anymore. The company that bought us has to make payroll.
That's somebody else's problem now.
It was just like
it just came right off of you. Yeah. First time in how many years that you didn't have to worry about payroll?
Yeah, in 15 years at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So let's talk about that period of due diligence and all that fun stuff. I guess we're going backwards a little bit, and then we'll bounce around. That's what we do here. But it's during that. I mean, did anything prepare you for that?
Yeah, we did a quality of earnings report. And so we sort of had a pre-measure, but it was still a corporate proctology exam.
Yeah.
I mean, and we did a Q of E report. For anybody who doesn't know, a quality of earnings report is where you get an outside firm to come in and basically do due diligence on you. And the reason that we did that was it didn't cost a lot of money. We didn't use, a top level accounting firm. We used a mid-level one, but one that would be acceptable. But what it did is it lowered the risk for companies that were looking at us. And when you lower the risk, you raise the value.
Absolutely.
Right? So we did it for that reason, but it also got a lot of the preparation that we needed for due diligence done ahead of time. And we'd also spent the previous year getting things straightened out. Like we had all these contracts with all these different companies, and they were not in one place, and we'd spent the year kind of gradually putting them together and getting all this organized, going through and buttoning up anything that was wrong. So we had a lot of it prepared in advance, right? But still, there's nothing to prepare you for. I need the payroll for these 5 people who haven't been working there for 5 years, and the reason that they are not there anymore, and you name it, they could come up with stuff. So finally, we reached the point to where our COO was getting tired of some of this because he's giving him the same information multiple times. They're asking for it again and again.
During the Q of E or during the transaction? They just keep asking for the same stuff. Yeah. Is it kind of like, detectives, they keep asking the same question hoping you'll trip up or something? Or what was
No, they're going down a checklist.
Okay.
And so he finally started saying, it's in the data room. And they go, okay. And he didn't know, it reached a point where he didn't know if it was in the data room or not. He would just tell them that, and they check, and they just move on.
All right.
And, they're using junior people, and they're just going down their checklist. We've got to have this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
And when it got to the point of ridiculousness, we just started telling them it was already in there. And I don't know whether it was in or not, but.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, quite a process. There's no question about it.
There were a few times when I felt like walking away. I mean,
and that's nearly always the case, I think, and everybody gets told that if they're using, a professional to go through a transaction, they'll say there will be moments. I'll tell you what's interesting though. You talked about the contracts, because we have a client a couple of years ago, big transaction, and one of the contracts, nearly completely tripped them up. And I think that's something that up until that point, I was like, well, I didn't really think about that. But, you've got to not only consolidate them, know where they are, be able to provide, probably ought to actually read them, and, sometimes if you're a, certain level company and you're selling to a company like at this level, well, ones at this level, they have attorneys that read all those things, maybe down this level, it's like you or me,
yep.
And it's totally different. They're looking at very different things than obviously we are. And just reading through those contracts and knowing what's in there, like for instance, just a springing feature within there that, oh, hey, by the way, if you sell the business, this contract is null and void at that day. Mm-hmm. Looking for stuff like that, right?
Yep. Yeah. And there's also stuff when you're dealing with us. So we ran our company from day one like we were a public company.
Okay.
So we had annual meetings, we had shareholder reports. I mean we built it to sell it. which is different than most small businesses.
No question.
So most small businesses are small businesses, they're family businesses. They're like Michael Gerber says that, the guy had an entrepreneurial seizure, fired the boss, and went to work for himself, who's a lunatic, right? So,
yeah, or like I like to say, most of my clients are business owners. They're business owners because they're unemployable.
Oh, that, after you've been self-employed long enough, that is
you are unemployable.
Yeah. But so a lot of times they run their businesses to minimize taxes, and that's the wrong thing to do if you anticipate selling it. So you've got guys scrambling to find information on the boat that the business bought, that the father-in-law, when he owned the company, bought the boat, and it's up at some lake, and now you got to go run up there and due diligence to get the information from that, and to figure out whether this is part of the transaction.
Yeah, they get the boat or not.
Yeah.
It's crazy stuff like that. Or I have to go back to, like, I would think that with a lot of contractors, it's inventory, right? Because, sometimes you don't really keep track of inventory, or a lot of them don't, to the level that they should. And sometimes it's tax driven, obviously, but, crucial as far as a valuation standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't. In our research, it didn't come up a lot.
It didn't come up. Okay.
I know that on the contractor side, which I'm really familiar with. Do you really want their 10-year-old part that they're never going to?
Yeah.
I mean, most of their inventory is not worth much, and most of their trucks.
Because most of the good stuff is cycling.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. That makes sense.
If they're doing it at all. You end up with weird stuff. One guy had to write in due diligence an exclusion for his taxidermy, because there was his taxidermy all over his office, and he wanted to make sure that was his, and didn't go as part of the business. I mean,
you just got to think of all that stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. So you built your business to sell, but like you said, most people don't.
Most people do not.
And yet, probably at some point need to start thinking about it that way. And usually it's not early enough, at least in my opinion.
Most people own a job, not a business, right? And it doesn't, to me, it does not become a business until you can leave it for a month and it still operates without you.
That's a great test, isn't it?
And I did that. I mean, I spent a few weeks in Europe at a trade show, and then just, messing around with my wife. Came back, went to Australia while we were setting up our Australia operation. So I spent more time down there. And when I got back, it was like everything was better. And it was like,
that's a good sign.
Just stay away, Matt, and see what else we can do.
Yeah. I think that's a great test. That's something that comes up, with us, with our clients a lot. Not only a test to see if your business can sustain something like that, but if you personally can sustain something like that, get completely out of your business for a while and start to maybe have some of those feelings that you will have when you exit permanently, and see, you try it on for size, right? That kind of thing. How did it feel just like messing around in Europe and not really worrying about anything?
I still checked email every morning.
Yeah.
Okay. I never was out of touch.
Yeah.
So it's not.
It wasn't the same.
Yeah.
But did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy traveling around?
Oh, yeah.
Stuff?
No,
okay.
I love to travel.
Okay.
And it is different when you're running a company and you get yourself in a position to where you take, and this is what every business owner should try to do. You take all the things that you hate, all the things that you just don't, there's things everybody hates and doesn't like to do. Well, I hired somebody to do each of those for me, or I delegated them to somebody. So I worked on the things that I enjoyed and that I was really good at. And if you're doing that and you're making money, then the question is, well, why sell? Well, in my case, I had investors, and they had been patient, and they were looking to get their money out, and it wouldn't have been fair to me I could have bought them out, but I couldn't have bought them out at what I thought the business was really worth. But they would have taken it. They would have been happy. Nobody would have, said anything. But I couldn't do that. So the only way to pay them off equitably was to sell the company.
It's funny you mentioned that, because we have a number of clients, like over the last few years that are kind of that's what they're, I guess that's where we are. Is it's like, well, why should I sell it? Because they've done what you said. So they've done a number of things. One is that they've done that. They've got good people running it. They can leave for a month or even more,
right?
And it even runs better. It's test. They've enjoyed, not being in the business. They have, good, strong, asset bases, what we call their wealth stack, outside of their business. So they're in a very financially secure place where it's not like they have to sell the business to be able to live the life that they want to live. They're living the life that they want to live. They're just kind of good. And, I think we believe that, you have to plan for the future and eventually, something's going to happen. And so, are you going to drive that, or circumstances going to drive that? Right. But it's an interesting spot to be, because we feel like we're part of it. Right. We've kind of created that with them, and they're just in a great spot. What do you think about that?
Everybody exits. Some people walk away, some people are carried away, but
right.
Everybody exits.
Yeah.
But I also get it that if you're running a lifestyle business, it may not be worth very much, but it's going to provide you with a nice income stream for as long as you want. Well, why not? Great, keep it going,
mm-hmm.
But make sure that you have put the structure in place so that your heirs are not burdened with the task of unwinding this thing.
Well,
so talk to a financial, talk to an estate planner.
Yeah.
Make sure you've talked to a financial planner. I really believe in that.
Yeah, I think I really like that. I think that for me, working with my clients that are in that situation, my instincts are, it's like, man, we need to be doing something. We need to be doing something. And maybe I'm pushing a little too hard, because maybe they've done all that. And in some cases, I think you're right. I think that the value of the business, for whatever reason, it's not maybe what it should be. And there can be a number of circumstances that can create that aren't necessarily bad. They just are what they are, so I think that's interesting.
Something that nobody talks about, or I guess some people do, but it's not talked about enough, is so you've got people who are going along, all of a sudden they have this liquidity event, and they've got more money than they've ever imagined in their life. And so now what do they do with it? How do they act? One of my friends from college said, look, don't spend anything for a year. Just don't make any major moves, any major purchases. Just sit on it for a year. And that was really good,
That's
counsel.
Good advice. Let's take a break real quick, and I want to come back to that.
Okay.
And we have a term for that here. We call it money drunk. And we'll talk about that. So we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Whether it was one generation ago or 7, more than likely as an American, an ancestor of yours took an extreme level of risk in order to create a better way of life for themselves, their family, and eventually you. Most families have a story to tell, at least one story. My family ended up here in Texas when their wagon broke down in Del Rio. The wagon train they were a part of continued westward, only to be completely massacred. I'm Rob Schultz, founder of Schultz Wealth. Our clients are entrepreneurs and business owners, the beneficiaries and true torchbearers of our American pioneer legacy. Our clients are not afraid of change. They are hopeful about the future, and they create wealth for themselves, their people, in this country through innovation, creativity, and hard work. Our job at Schultz Wealth is to help make sure it counts for something. If you're a successful business owner, let Schultz Wealth help you to the next level and beyond. All right, we're back with Matt and Michel. Money drunk. Money drunk is what we call it, because
it's a great term.
It is. I mean, you just have this liquidity that you've maybe never had before. And a lot of really, really, really bad decisions get made.
So I read this book that talk about, when you suddenly become wealthy, it's like you're immigrating to a new country.
Okay.
And there's a different culture and there's different mores. And some people bring their old culture with them and refuse to adapt and integrate. Some dump their old culture altogether. And that's the people that probably get money drunk and they just go on wild spending sprees. And the answer is to maintain the culture that helped get you there while also adapting to the new environment.
I love that, Matt. I will add, at least in my experience, a lot of times it has to do with age, the age of the entrepreneur. The younger ones tend to get a little bit more money drunk than the ones that, like I've been married forever, 35 years or something like that. The ones like at that level that have kind of an already established, kind of this is who I am. I'm good. Got my family and all that kind of stuff. They tend to not do it as much. That's something that I've noticed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know that the younger ones I know that suddenly have gone through this, especially with private equity.
Yeah.
They're just counting the days for that non-compete to expire.
And ready to go at it again.
They're going to go at it again.
There's no question. That's the case. My advice would be, I've always had a saying. I wrote it down when I was in my early 20s. That my goal with money, because our relationship with money is obviously very convoluted, right, for all of us. And I wrote down that really my goal with money was to never worry about money. It wasn't like I needed to get to a certain amount or anything like that. Sure, there were many goals around that, but the idea, my concept was never worry about money. And there are a couple of ways you can get there. Okay. And, I learned how to get there in a way that, driving my income up was extremely important, but it wasn't the only thing. Let's just put it that way.
So there's a couple of quotes that just pop into my mind talking about this. One of them is from a fraternity brother who's a financial advisor. And he said, it's only money. What else are you going to do with it?
Right.
And that's part of the die with zero philosophy.
Sure.
Enjoy it while you can. And then I've got another buddy that we ride together to these board meetings that are, a 3.5 hour drive from here. And, his philosophy is, if you don't fly first class, your kids will.
Yeah.
So he's always encouraging me, pushing me to not be so cheap and to spend more money. But and I do,
and that's part of that. That's that part of that adapting.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just love what you said about, hey, you want to carry across that line, the good parts, right, of where you've been and who you are, right? And then you, like you said, that, it is hard, to write that check for first class to Europe the first time. It doesn't fit, with kind of who you are,
Well, yeah. I mean, there's people that get on the plane, and I always want, people that get on the plane and go to the left.
Yeah.
Only get there a nanosecond before me if I go to the right.
Yeah.
And we sleep the whole time. But, it's hard for me to spend that much money to go to the left. But I'm starting to figure it out with my wife's help.
There you go.
So she will go to Europe if she can go to the left.
Uh-huh.
And so, all right. If I'm going by myself, I'm probably going to the right.
Yeah.
But
so that's been an adaptation, I guess. Obviously having the liquidity, trying not to go, money drunk, as I call it, but yet, still obviously be able to use it and value it, and be able to just make yourself and everybody around you. It certainly is an awesome thing.
Well, the challenge and what I'm going through right now is we're working on making sure that we don't copy the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
That's right.
So we're working on the culture for our family, the family mission, And it's not just all the financial, it's not just the legal structures. We got plenty of those set in place and trusts. And but how do we make sure that our kids are not, they're going to be good custodians, but our grandchildren don't go crazy or understand the value of it? How do we create this culture within our family so that the wealth doesn't expire?
Yeah. So it's interesting you said culture and not structure.
Right.
Now, obviously, you said, we've got structure and all that. And, that's that classic controlling from the grave concept, which you can do to a certain extent with estates and trusts and, all that kind of stuff. But you said culture, we call it kid training around here, kid and grandkid training.
Yeah.
What I always say about it is like, look, you've got a couple of choices when you got a 16-year-old driver. You can go out and say, okay, well, I'm just going to buy the absolute safest car on the market, which is not a bad idea, with the airbags and all that kind of stuff. Volvo made a whole bunch of money that way over a long period of time. Everybody wanted to put their kid in a Volvo. But, it's more effective is to actually spend the time with your kid and teach him how to drive safely. And yet most people contract that out to one of the coaches at the high school, I feel like we do that too much with regard to money and certainly generational wealth.
We don't like to talk about it.
It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and certainly, this is one of the things that I think a lot of entrepreneurs go through when they suddenly become wealthy.
Yeah.
They don't have anybody they can talk to about it. And, and I'm fortunate that, I've got a group of people that are in similar financial conditions that I am, and we talk a lot, and I learn things from them. They learn things from me.
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer in the power of groups and the power of sharing. And that's the underlying philosophy of the Service Nation.
I was about to say. I mean, you that's what you built with Service Nation was that type of accountability, that type of sharing. Same here. I've got a core group. Talk about things with that group that I can't talk about with anybody else.
Right.
And that's crucial. And so you've continued that past your career.
I have. I didn't necessarily plan it. It just sort of happened. But there are a good half dozen people that know exactly where I am, and I know exactly where they are, and we talk about the challenges, the things that we run into. And it can be as simple as, people when they find out that you are worth a certain amount of money or get some idea, they treat you different, right? And so that's one of the reasons people don't like to talk about it. They want to, they don't want to be treated different just because they have assets.
I guess that can kind of go with, like, as far as this not wanting to share necessarily with your kids, grandkids, et cetera, it can kind of go there a little bit too. Because, are they going to really understand, that generational wealth the way we do? Not necessarily.
It's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And I don't worry about my kids because they've been on their own enough that we didn't. I mean, we got them through college. They're married. They're on their own. They're struggling to support themselves, with their husbands and their kids.
Yeah.
And they value $1, right?
Mm-hmm.
But our grandchildren, that's going to take an established culture, and we got to meet annually, and we got to talk about it, and we got to have these weekends and family meetings to where we go through this, because we don't want to be like the Vanderbilts. And you, of course, know the story. I mean, Cornelius Vanderbilt was the richest man in America, had more money than the U.S. Treasury. And 3 generations later, his grandchildren met at Vanderbilt University, and none of them was a millionaire.
Yeah. So. Yeah. No, it's very common. Of course, the other happens as well. There have been, there's been success from that standpoint.
The Rothschilds.
Well. Yeah, absolutely. There's been a number of examples of families that have been able to continue that. And it wasn't because, in my opinion, it wasn't because they had some kind of magic estate structure. It was because they had that culture.
Right.
And it's the same as it's the same as teaching a young driver, right? It takes time and effort.
Well, look, we do this in business, right? Culture is everything. I mean, Peter Drucker said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Okay, strategy, great strategy has to be executed to work. Culture is self-executing. So you can walk away from your company if you've got a good culture. People will still do the right things because that's the culture. And just as I went through a long period of time where I knew we had a culture. I knew it was a good culture, but it just sort of happened.
Yeah.
And then I went to the Disney Leadership Institute, and I sort of learned that culture is something that you can design. It's something that you can create, and it starts with understanding your shared values and fostering those. And those values determine behaviors, and behaviors drive results. So culture drives results, right? So that once that hit me, it was one of those aha moments. And so I started focusing really hard on the values for our company and stressing those. And, I used to pass out value cards. So there was a value and a definition of it. And every month was a different focus on a different value.
Let's talk about your book that you wrote, because that has a lot to do with culture. The one, what's the name of it that you did the short stories that?
Oh, Contractor Stories.
Talk to us about that a little bit.
So Contractor Stories is just fictional stories, right? They're short stories. They all have a business lesson. And I wrote this specifically for the service trades. And the reason, and like the book that I'm working on with Brandon on the emotional side of selling is for any business.
Sure.
Contractor Stories really is for sort of small businesses, and it could be a painting company, it could be an HVAC contractor, it could be anything. But people in these businesses by nature tend to be a little ADHD, right? If they like to read a lot, big heavy books, they'd be lawyers. So they're, they know they need information, they want information, and if you can deliver it to them in an entertaining fashion, then they're going to be more likely to sit down and consume it. So that's the purpose behind writing entertaining stories that have business lessons associated with each one of them.
Yeah. But you wrote a second book too that was mainly based upon, your team meetings that you did through COVID, right?
So we, and this unfortunately is not commercially available right now, but
it's so cool because it speaks to culture. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
So the Friday the 13th, flying back from San Diego to Dallas, the world was going crazy. I'm sitting there on the plane trying to think, what do I tell people? I focused first on our members, and I focused on our team, and I'm thinking, okay, I got people that are already dispersing. They're going to be working from home. They're probably going to feel sorry for themselves. What can I do to make sure that we stay together as a company and that we are supportive of our members, which is our mission? And the thing is the solution to both problems were the same solution. So if I could get our team to focus on serving and helping our members, that helps our members and that gets our team outside of themselves, because it's impossible to feel sorry for yourself when you're focused on serving others.
Yeah. Don't bury your head in the sand, get up and go. Yeah.
And so that Monday morning, I found a motivational video. I posted it on our company Slack channel, got a bunch of responses, did it again, a bunch of responses, started writing notes with, and it developed over time and literally every day for over 2 years. I would write a story. Sometimes they're personal, and I would open up. I would be vulnerable, which encourages trust.
Absolutely.
And I would tell stories. Sometimes, a lot of times, they're history. I love history. I would go find obscure, lessons, and I would write about it, and I would write it in a way that nobody really knew what I was talking about until we got to the end.
Nice.
And tried to entertain them, but also drive home something that motivated them and made them feel positive, about what's going on in the world. And so we took that, put it in a collection of 3 books. One of them was published, they're called Uplift. One of them was published before I left the company. After I left the company, without me to push it, it just died.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think anything is a better example of driving culture than than the effort that you put forth in that. That's and that makes me think that the family meetings, when we're trying to drive culture within our families for multi-generational wealth / culture, kind of the same thing, trying to really try to tell stories, et cetera, and so forth. The family meetings are tough. I've struggled with, not only how to advise clients to do this, but then also just personally. And your book idea is really cool because, I've written, hundreds and hundreds of blogs. I've written a book, et cetera, and I love storytelling. And I haven't really said it out loud, but one of my things, I think I'm going to skip what my next book was going to be, and I'm going to do a short story deal that's primarily for my family. And it's going to have personal stories, that I have written in the past, about my kids, about myself, about, our family and so forth and so on, and maybe some other motivational things. And hopefully they read it, right?
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with the need to tell my family my story, and be completely open. And my wife is on the same thing. We've got to do that. And storytelling is important because it's in our DNA, right? Long before we had a written language, we sat around campfires in tribes,
right.
And we told stories about staying alive, stories about where to find food, stories about things to avoid, how to not get hurt. And there's a reason, that Christ talked in parables, which were stories. And 2,000 years ago, we're still talking about.
Yeah. No, that's my next, personal project, I think, is to get that done. And yeah, I think, there's, just thinking through what we've talked about, there are so many ways, I think, to translate some of the things that we work so hard in within our businesses, over to, be a strong leader within our families. There's no question. And that's certainly one of them. Just being intentional about it.
And this stuff that comes so easy for me in business is so hard at home.
I don't tell those. I don't just sit there and tell those stories. And I think part of it is because that's what my granddad did, like way too much, right? So I don't want to be that, and yet, sometimes we kind of err on the wrong side. But I love to write. That's how I can do it,
So I was balking at this a little bit, and and it was, you got to share your legacy. And I said, I don't care. And my wife kind of kicked me in the side of the head and, get over yourself. And really what she said is, wouldn't you like to know what your grandfather was thinking? And I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, I have one of my grandfathers was a, politician, ran for Congress, big deal in his town, small business owner. I really have no idea what he said or thought or anything. I have a campaign picture of him, when he.
That's it. Yeah. That stuff gets lost, so easily.
And I'd love to be able to sit down and listen to him. So what about my grandchildren or their children?
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard for me too. I mean, and for a whole multitude of reasons, one is I don't want to be that guy that's, saying, look at me, look at how important I am.
It's why we don't like to talk about money. Right?
Yeah.
We don't want to brag. We don't want to boast. No. We don't want to, we don't want to be too self-promotional.
And I don't want to be preachy either, and so it's an interesting line. I think, using stories, whether that's in family meetings that I think are very important, or whether you actually publish a book of some type, whatever it may be. I got the idea of doing that because my uncle did a really cool autobiography before he passed away a few years ago. And it was really cool I've learned so many things about him that I didn't know, Yeah. And I have a good friend who kind of did the same thing and published his, and I read it. And it gives you just so much interesting insight. And both of them did it right and this is where we screw up okay, is we just want to tell the kids the good stuff, right? The successful stuff. But man, can they learn a lot from some of the mistakes I've made, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to admit them.
I don't either. I don't want to talk about that. But yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that's an important part. It's certainly what makes you, like you said, vulnerable and more believable, within your business when you're trying to build your culture as well. I think that like in business, where you started with your company was very different from where the people were that you hired 10 years later, for instance. Mm-hmm. And, I think it's really easy. I know it is for me and my junior partner, for Austin to not understand fully from a perspective standpoint what I had to do when I was his age. Well, he has to do completely different things. And we have to have respect for those different things. And we also need to just know the full truth sometimes, Yeah. Anyway, I think it's really cool that you have taken so many things and translated it over into your retirement.
Well, I'm trying. I wouldn't say it's done. I think it's a work in process. That's barely in process.
Well, it's so cool. You just continue to give. And this book that's coming out, do we have a title for it?
We're
not yet.
We're hashing that out. I mean,
okay.
We're kind of leaning on, what no one ever told you about selling a business, just because that's marketable.
It's descriptive. It's good.
Brandon's first thought was selling your soul. And I thought, Then he said selling your baby. I said,
Yeah. I got you.
We're working on it. One thing that's key in that book, though, that we haven't mentioned, I don't want to overlook, is in the process of selling the company. Again, we talked to all these people, right? And we talked to people that used an M&A advisor or an investment bank, and people that didn't.
Yeah.
And when trying to sell your business on your own is like trying to sell your house on your own, right? You could have a couple things happen. Like somebody can come by your house, knock on the door, said, "Hey, you got a nice house here. I'll give you $200,000 for it." And you're thinking, $200,000 for this? Wow, okay. And you take the money, and then you realize that you can't buy an equivalent house for $200,000. You don't know, right? You have no idea what the value is. That's when somebody calls you up on the phone, or you answer the email, and somebody tries to money whip you. You may not be getting full value for your company.
You probably aren't.
Probably aren't. Right. The other thing that you can do if you're selling your house on yourself is you put a sign in the yard for sale by owner. And you got to hope that the right buyer drives down your street and sees that sign. If he drives down one street over, he'll never see it. And the same thing can happen when you're selling your business. If you're trying to sell it, on your own, you're not reaching certain buyers that would potentially be interested in it. The investment bank that we used, the guy said, "I wouldn't presume to know who might or might not be interested in your company." And in the end, it was a company that, on the surface, I never would have suspected. I mean, they were a merchant services company.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But it also made a lot of sense because they had thousands of customers that were similar to our customers. And it was a very easy for me to envision our being able to spread our product across their base. And then we could also bring customers to them. And they were planning on the whole platform. But anyway, going back to using an M&A advisor or an investment bank is like calling a realtor. And you call a realtor to sell your house because they get you in the multiple listing service, and thousands of potential buyers will see it. And the ones that come and see you are the ones that are interested. And the same way that an investment bank will market you to potentially thousands, depending on the investment bank.
Right.
And you're.
Oh, I agree. It's crucial, because this is, unless you just buy and sell businesses, all the time, this transaction is a huge deal.
It's the biggest transaction of your life, right? And this is not a DIY project.
You can't screw this up. You need to get it right. And it's going to cost money. And man, you're talking about. You think the M&A, the investment bankers, taking a cut. I mean, you have professionals, all, the law firm, as you alluded to, et cetera. There's a lot of expense associated with this. You need to be It's going to cost money. You just need to be efficient about it and smart and make sure you get where you need to get to.
Well, I will tell you, I don't think I wrote our investment bank a check for, a 7-figure check.
Yeah.
Didn't cost me a dime because they got me more than I wrote them by, multiple. And it's just like with a realtor. Realtor comes in and says, hey, that sort of hot pink wall, you may want to paint that neutral, right? And they'll give you tips like that will help you improve the saleability of your house and speed the process. And then they'll get multiple buyers so that you've got people competing to buy your house. Well, it's the same thing with an iBank or an M&A advisor.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun to be in the end when we had 4 different people who were trying to outbid themselves to buy us. And we finally hit the number that we had as a target that people said we couldn't hit. And then it was, okay, which one of these is the best fit?
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I appreciate you explaining it that way because, we run into that all the time with clients that, really don't want to go there, but need to. It's so important.
You're passing over dollars to save dimes.
Yeah.
You can just ask them, if you were going to sell your house, how would you sell it? Well, you'd call a realtor, right? And you're going to pay the realtor 6%. No big deal. The realtor's going to get you more than 6%.
In most cases, yeah, no question. Well, cool. Well, man, this has been a great session, Matt. I've been so excited about getting you in to have this discussion, and you did not disappoint. I really appreciate the discussion where we went today. Super fun stuff. I'm looking forward to your book. So let's definitely stay in touch. And when you've come up with the title and all that kind of stuff, let me know, because I want to be one of the first people to read it and share your story.
We are closing in on finishing the writing. So
Great. Matt, if somebody wants to get in touch with you and maybe talk about some of these issues and so forth,
sure.
What's a good way for them to contact you?
Happy to talk to anybody. My email address is Matt, M-A-T-T, Michel, M-I-C-H-E-L, at mail.com, not Gmail, just mail.com. I don't care. You can call me on my mobile. It's 214-995-8889. That's 214-995-8889. I'm on social media, on LinkedIn, Facebook. You can look me up that way.
Wow, we really appreciate that, Matt. So I encourage you; those will be in the show notes as well. That information, and if you want to reach out to Matt and get his insight into all this, get his book when it comes out here very soon.
If you need a speaker for your meeting,
yeah, if you need a speaker as well, Matt's your guy. Thanks everybody for being with us. We try to get this out every other week, and if you got any great stories for us, people that you think we ought to be talking about or talking with, just let me know. Hope everybody has a great week. Take care.
Thank you.